everybody, so back with my review and first sort of thoughts about the PickPro 600w scooter. Yeah, it came last week. I've had it over the course of the weekend. Been able to go out, have a bit of a range test both on the eco settings and on the speed mode, and I'm going to have the data available later on in this video, so if you're interested in that, stay tuned because I'll just put up some photos and you can look over the data, but I'll also give it a little bit of an analysis as I go. So good things about this scooter, well, there's a few things to touch on and a couple of sort of not bad things but just like potentially a little bit inconvenient. The first thing is the actual folding mechanism. So as you can see here, it is really compact, it's really nice, like it's not that heavy. If you're ever on public transport, whatever it is, like it's easy to carry like that. There's like a little part at the back that actually hits the bell, and that catches on this part. But the trick with it is it's actually a little bit difficult to get it off. So that's, there you go. It normally takes a couple of goes. So that's one little thing. So this little sort of clip that is the ringer on the bell. So that just catches on the back part here. The other thing worth mentioning is this here can sometimes get a little bit stiff. I think over time it probably loosens up a little bit, but at the moment it's been a little bit stiff. But when that's locked in, it feels pretty good, to be honest. It is a little bit loose compared to another scooter that I have, which is a more solid sort of stem. It's one of the ones with the batteries in the stem, but because this doesn't have the battery in there, it's just cabling. It is a little bit loose, and from a few other reviews and that sort of thing about the Xiaomi models and a few other clones like this one, some people have said that is a little bit of an issue, but when you're riding, it's not that big a deal because you're going over bumps anyway. Another thing worth mentioning is this back fender here. It is not a foot brake, so do not try and stand on that. It's quite flimsy, actually. So yeah, I've seen a few people try and use that as a brake. Do not use that as a brake. It will not work. You've only got the handbrake to use, but it's quite good as well. Apart from that, as I already mentioned the kickstand in the previous video, the kickstand, I'll spin it around, is it leaves a little bit too desired. It's not, maybe I could chuck something on the end of that to make that a little bit sturdier, but yeah, it just doesn't feel particularly sturdy when it's like that. So if you're going to store it somewhere, it's probably best to put it down. The kickstand works when the actual handlebars are down on the fender. It all works pretty well. But apart from that, when you're actually riding it, a few things to note. The first is in the eco setting, the acceleration is really slow off the mark. That was the first most obvious thing that stood out to me in the eco settings. And it gets a little bit better when you're in the sport settings, but for me, I do prefer to get up to top speed a little bit faster. So quite slow from an acceleration standpoint compared to the other e-scooter that I have. So that's one thing. It does seem to be faster than the other e-scooter that I have as well when going up hills. When going down hills though, it's not quite as fast, and I'll have more of that when I go into a bit more of an analysis later on. I've got some range tests, some speed tests, and where I live, it's quite hilly, so it was probably pretty good to test the range. But the one thing that I will mention about the range and the battery life and that sort of thing is that the battery life in the eco settings, the easiest way to explain it is you get about an hour's worth of use. So you can go however far you want in that hour, but it's basically an hour. So I'm not a big fan of companies on their websites saying that, oh, this scooter can go X, Y, or Z in terms of kilometers. This is the range, this is how fast it goes, all that sort of stuff. They're quite variable, but what I've found is that in the eco mode, you're going to get an hour's worth, and in the sport mode, you're probably going to get 40 minutes to 45 minutes, somewhere in that range. What does happen though is that the scooter, when it gets to the last bit of the battery, it starts flashing red, and I've got a video that I'll tap on in a sec. So that's what it looks like when the battery is really low. Now, when there's basically no charge left, you will significantly drop off in the speed that you're able to go. Like it basically gets to walking pace where you can only go like 10 kilometers an hour. And it's at that point that you're going to have to charge it. So when I did my range test, both times the battery didn't go to a complete standstill, but it got to the point where it's basically unusable. So that's where I cut it off. Apart from that, look, you get what you pay for. I think that for $500, as I said in my previous video, you're probably not going to find a better scooter. The range is good for what it's worth. All of that, it's relatively well made. Don't have too many hassles. It does feel a little bit higher when you're riding it. And I might go out and grab a little bit of footage as well so that you can see how it looks when it's moving and that sort of stuff. So basically, they're my thoughts. If there's anything else, I can always, if anyone's got any questions, maybe pop them down and I can answer. However, that's basically my review of the PickPro scooter that you can find at pickpro.com.au.
Alrighty, so we'll get into the analysis of the eco mode test results. So basically I tested for range, speed, and a bunch of other stuff. So we'll just quickly go through it. So I was able to go 15.62 kilometers on the range test, which is actually fairly decent. It's nowhere near the 50 kilometers that they claim. But then again, my weight is about 85 kilos and I'm about 185 centimeters. So normally when companies do range tests, they're doing it for people I think who are about 75 kilograms. And normally it's on a flat surface. So as you can see, there was a fair bit of elevation gain there. So I was going up and down hills, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. I'll show another graphic showing just how hilly it was. So as I said in the previous part of this video, I was moving for about an hour. So you basically get an hour's worth, and the average speed was 15.8. So about 16 kilometers an hour for an hour. That's basically what you get. This here is the actual elevation chart. So you can see, so I started off around, maybe 118 or so meters above sea level, and then had a bit of downhill, had a bit of uphill. And as you can see, there's a fair bit of climbing that's going on there. I dare say that the results would vary. If I'm going, say, along the coast, where it's obviously at sea level, I dare say you would get more. I might do a range test later on near the sea at some point to just see what the actual difference is, but I suspect maybe 20. And the final part of our analysis is the actual speed, which is pretty important for a lot of people. They want to know, how fast can it go? Well, the 30.6 kilometers an hour that I clocked in the eco mode is a little bit of a lie, because I actually did change it to the sport mode because I was going down this huge hill and I just wanted to see how fast it could go. So it is a little bit misleading. The average speed is probably more realistic, but in all honesty, I felt when I was riding it that I was probably hovering around the 18 or 19. It's also worth noting that the speedo that's on the scooter itself is slightly out by maybe 1 or 2 kilometers an hour, but at the end of the day, it's not terrible. So just to sum up, you get about an hour's worth of moving time at an average speed of about 16 kilometers an hour. And that's on a fairly hilly terrain, as you can see. So the speed's fairly constant. Alrighty, so we'll get into the sport mode, and you can see right off the bat, there was actually not too much difference in the range between the eco setting and the sport setting. The real big difference was probably with respect to the moving time. So in the eco mode, you get basically an hour's worth of ride time. In the sport mode, where the battery obviously drains faster because you're riding faster, you only get about 45 minutes. So fairly big difference. The elevation was basically the same. I tried to make it as consistent as possible for that purpose. You don't obviously pay a lot of attention to the power and calories and all that sort of stuff. But the distance is only about, 2 kilometers less. So all in all, fairly decent from the sport mode to be able to go as fast as it did for as long as it did. So you can see that the average speed is obviously up higher. So it's at 18.6 kilometers an hour. And the reason for that was because obviously you're going faster, but I feel like if it was a flat terrain, it would probably be a little bit more accurate there, because there was a lot of ups and downs. And so trying to get the average speed out of that is a little bit tricky to do. So just to illustrate that point, here actually is the elevation chart. I went over a lot of the same areas. You can see that sort of from about the 6th kilometer onwards or thereabouts. That's that same sort of bowl shape that I did in the first eco test. So yeah, there's a lot of comparable segments here. I feel as though maybe once you drop below, probably once you get into about 2 bars left on the battery, you do obviously go slower, and it does make it harder going up those hills. So between sort of the 9th and the 10th kilometer, as I was coming out of that, it was, obviously it started to go a little bit slow, and you'll see that in the comparison chart when I look at the speed in a second. But it's worth noting that you do sort of, the speed and the power obviously drop off a little bit there. And basically this is what verifies it. So if you have a look for up until probably maybe like the 12th kilometer, the first 12 kilometers, your average speed is definitely in excess of 20. I feel as though the average speed of 18.6 only really happened as a result of what happened after 12 kilometers, because I started going really slow because the battery started to obviously get a bit sluggish and that sort of stuff trying to go uphill. So for the majority of the ride, I would easily say that I was probably hovering around 21, 22. Really good speed. Obviously going downhill you go faster, so you can see that the max speed there that I clocked was 29.9. I definitely feel like on the speedo at least, it definitely had in excess of 30. So you sort of take that with a grain of salt, what it says on the speedo, because obviously it's worth mentioning that these results and this data that I've used is off a Garmin watch, so fairly accurate data. It's not just off my phone's GPS, which could be potentially out a little bit, but like Garmin technology for tracking this sort of stuff is generally pretty spot on. So I'd say that you can trust the results of this data. The charge time from completely dead to completely charged was basically 6 hours. I was keeping an eye on it just to see how long it would take. It takes quite a significant amount of time. Obviously 6 hours is not 5 minutes. So if you're going to be charging this, I suggest that you probably leave it overnight. But just be aware of one thing that I'm just going to show you in a little second, a video that I took just after I did my eco test, which is basically the final thing that I'll use to wrap this video up. So enjoy. So I've just got back from doing the eco range test, the eco mode range test, and just thought I would quickly touch on something with the charging. So I've got an extension cable here, so I'll just go ahead and plug that one in. Okay, and I just thought this was worth noting because it took me a little bit to figure out. So it turns green when it's plugged in. Okay, and the funny thing is that if you take it out real quick, like it stays green for a while, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but I'll explain. I don't know how long it's going to stay. I've never actually timed it before. But anyway, so if I leave it out, so it's currently not plugged in, and if I go to plugged in to the charge point, okay, so it's in, and this green light is still on. Okay. Now that doesn't seem like a big deal, but what actually happens is if you just leave that in there, that green light's going to stay on. And see how this is, like, it's literally unplugged. But if that green light stays in there, it's going to charge. It's not going to charge, sorry. It's actually going to drain the battery a little bit because, I left it open. I mean like unplugged the other night. And when I came back to it the next morning, when I realized that the green light was actually still on, even though it wasn't plugged in. And so when I did plug it in and turn it on, then it came up as red, which is how you know that the battery is depleted. So the battery is all but done at the moment. So if I plug this in, you'll notice
that light will turn red. So when that battery light is red, it means that the scooter is charging. So that's all plugged in, that's all working properly. If I take that out again, obviously that light will turn green, and it actually means that it's stealing a little bit of power. So that's just something to be aware of when you're charging your scooter. Just make sure that you completely unplug it to make sure that you don't lose any battery overnight.